Everyone prays. But have you ever wondered why so few ever feel the one they pray to? We stand, we bow, we whisper the words we were taught, yet the heart remains untouched. What if the prayer you've repeated your whole life was never the prayer your soul was meant to offer? Ibn Arabi once said, "The true prayer begins the moment you stop praying the way you were taught, because what most call worship is only motion without meaning. And what the divine seeks from you is not your posture, but your presence." 1. The body bows, but does the heart? Ibn Arabi said that most people bow with their backs, yet their hearts remain standing. He called this the prayer of habit, the kind that is seen by the eyes, heard by the ears, and counted by the mind, but never truly felt by the soul. He warned that the danger of routine worship is that it looks complete on the surface while being hollow within. The body performs its duty, but the spirit watches in silence, waiting to be remembered. When prayer becomes habit, the body knows what to do before the mind even arrives. The hands rise, the knees touch the ground, the tongue moves with precision. It looks perfect, but perfection in form can often hide absence in essence. Ibn Arabi invites us to see beyond the motion, to ask what moves within the motion, for he taught that the true bowing is not of the spine, but of the soul. It is not about lowering your body, but lowering yourself, that proud hidden self that claims ownership even over its devotion. He said the bow of the body is easy. It takes a moment, but the bow of the heart can take a lifetime. To bow with the heart means to let go of control, to accept that you are not the doer, only the one through whom the doing flows. It means realizing that even in prayer, your greatest obstacle can be the very idea that you are the one praying. As long as the I stands at the center, true surrender has not yet happened. This is what Ibn Arabi meant when he asked, "When you say, 'I am praying,' who is this I?" If the self still speaks, then prayer remains trapped in the realm of separation, where you imagine yourself standing before a distant God. But when the I falls silent, when the boundary between worshipper and worship dissolves, then prayer changes its meaning. It is no longer you praying, it is the divine praying through you, to itself, as itself. In that moment, the bow is real. The body becomes an instrument, and the heart becomes the temple. The act is the same, but the awareness within it is transformed. One is mechanical, the other mystical. One begins and ends in time. The other is timeless. Ibn Arabi observed that many people confuse repetition with devotion. They believe that because they have performed the form, they have fulfilled the essence. But he taught that devotion begins where repetition ends. True prayer cannot be manufactured through habit. It is born only through awakening. The prayer of habit starts with the clock. The prayer of the heart starts with longing. He would say, the purpose of bowing is not to please a watching God, but to awaken the sleeping heart. Every movement in prayer is a symbol, a language of the soul expressed through the body. When you stand, it represents awareness. When you bow, it represents humility. When you prostrate, it represents annihilation, the death of the ego. But if these gestures are performed without consciousness, they are only movements, not meanings. So Ibn Arabi urges the seeker to pause before every motion. When you raise your hands, ask yourself, what am I lifting away from? When you bow, ask, what am I surrendering to? When you place your forehead to the ground, ask, has my heart also fallen with it? Without this inner participation, the body's obedience is empty. The bow may reach the floor, but the heart remains standing tall, untouched, unbent, and unchanged. The danger, he said, is that we become experts in the posture of worship while remaining strangers to its purpose. We learn how to pray, but not why we pray. We master the form, but forget the essence. It is like memorizing poetry in a language you do not understand. You can recite it beautifully, but its beauty never reaches you. The meaning remains imprisoned in sound. And so Ibn Arabi's question lingers like a mirror in front of every worshipper. Does your heart bow when your body bows? For if it does not, then the body's movement is only imitation. Real prayer is not imitation. It is encounter. It is the meeting of the finite with the infinite, the merging of breath and being. When the heart bows, something within you dies, and something eternal is born. He explained that the heart's bowing is not a single act, but a state of being. It begins when you recognize your dependence, when pride loosens its grip and humility takes root. You begin to see that every heartbeat, every breath is already an act of worship, whether you acknowledge it or not. The body prays by design, the heart prays by awakening. The true prayer then is not an obligation imposed from outside, but a remembrance that arises from within. When the heart bows, the world bows with it. The trees, the wind, the light, all seem to join in a silent harmony. You begin to feel that prayer is not a moment in time, but a current that flows through everything. To pray with the heart is to align with that current. It is to surrender to the rhythm of existence, to say without words, I am nothing but what you make me. And yet, Ibn Arabi was not condemning the outer prayer. He saw it as a doorway. The form exists to guide you toward the formless. The body's bowing is the shadow of a deeper truth, the heart's bowing. But the tragedy is that many stop at the shadow and never step into the light. They perform the symbol and forget the reality it points to. The bow becomes an act of memory, not an act of meeting. He urged seekers to approach prayer as if it were the first time and the last time at once, to pray as though they had never learned it before, fresh, uncalculated, alive, because the divine is new in every instant. Nothing about this moment has ever existed before. To meet the eternal with a heart full of repetition is to miss the living presence that reveals itself only in awareness. So when Ibn Arabi said, most people bow with their backs, but their hearts remain standing, he was not criticizing the people, he was awakening them. He was pointing to a blindness hidden within devotion, a kind of spiritual sleep that looks like obedience. He was calling the seeker back to the essence, to remember that the goal of prayer is not performance but union, not perfection but presence. And if one day in the middle of prayer you suddenly forget the words, lose the rhythm, and fall into silence, do not be afraid. That may be the moment the heart finally bows, because the heart does not speak in language, and the divine does not listen to words. The divine listens to the state of your being, to the echo of surrender that cannot be faked, to the humility that arises when the I disappears. So the next time you bow, ask quietly within, is my body bending, or is my being surrendering? Because the difference between those two is the distance between habit and holiness, the distance between the noise of ritual and the silence of real prayer, the distance between saying, I am praying, and realizing there was never an I to begin with. 2. The tongue repeats, but the heart must speak. Ibn Arabi said that the tongue is a servant of the heart, but most people have made it their master. He warned that the greatest distance between a human being and the divine is not the sky or the sea. It is the distance between the lips and the heart. The tongue may move with words of devotion, but if the heart remains still, then those words rise into emptiness. True prayer, he taught, begins not when we speak, but when the heart begins to tremble with awareness of whom it addresses. For many, prayer has become a sound repeated so often that its weight has vanished. The words flow easily, perfectly memorized, and yet untouched by meaning. They are recited as one would hum a song remembered from childhood, familiar but forgotten in spirit. Ibn Arabi said that the divine does not listen to the vibration of sound, the divine listens to the vibration of being. Words are only vessels. If they carry no presence, they are like empty cups offered to the sky. When the heart speaks, silence itself becomes a language. A single breath filled with sincerity can outweigh 1,000 eloquent prayers spoken without awareness. The one who prays from the tongue alone is like a musician reading notes without hearing the melody. The one who prays from the heart has already heard the music before it begins. To pray from the heart is to allow the words to be born out of love, not memory. It is to stand before the infinite and realize that every word is already known, every longing already answered. The heart does not repeat, it reveals. It reveals the depth of your need, your surrender, your recognition that you belong entirely to the one you call upon. Ibn Arabi said that when a prayer rises from the heart, it is not you who prays, but the divine remembering itself through you. He explained that the heart possesses a language that no tongue can translate. It is a language made of yearning, tears, and stillness. When the heart speaks, the whole being listens. The body becomes quiet, the thoughts soften, and even the air around you feels aware. This is the state of remembrance he described, not a practice, but a presence. You do not do remembrance, you become it. But most people, he said, never reach this state because their prayers remain confined to the surface. They are caught in the habit of repetition, believing that the sound alone carries power. Yet sound without spirit is like a letter without ink. It has shape but no meaning. Repetition without awareness can become a veil, a rhythm that lulls the soul into sleep instead of awakening it. Ibn Arabi urged the seeker to look beneath the sound, to listen not to the words but to the silence between them. That silence, he said, is where the divine responds. When you pray, notice how easily the lips move. Notice how the words arrive before your mind has even reflected on their meaning. This is the habit of the tongue. But if you pause, breathe, and let the heart feel the weight of every word, you will notice something shift. The prayer slows down. The air thickens. The presence deepens. What was once repetition becomes revelation. You begin to understand that every name of the divine is not a sound to be recited, but a doorway to be entered. Ibn Arabi often compared the heart to a mirror. When you speak without presence, the mirror is fogged by the breath of the self. It cannot reflect the light of the divine. But when you pray from the heart, that fog clears. The words no longer belong to you. They become reflections of the one you address. In that moment, the act of speaking and the act of listening are the same, because there is no longer a you and him, only the echo of unity speaking through both. He said that remembrance begins with effort but ends in grace. At first you must discipline the tongue, focus the mind, remind yourself to be present. But over time something shifts. The heart begins to remember on its own. It no longer needs prompting. Even in silence, you will feel as if the prayer continues beneath your thoughts, as if your very breath has learned to recite the name of the One without your command. This, Ibn Arabi said, is the prayer of the lovers. They do not remember because they must. They remember because they cannot forget. When the heart speaks, the entire universe seems to respond. The rustle of the wind, the rhythm of the waves, the pulse of your veins, all begin to echo the same message. There is only one speaker, and all words belong to him. The illusion that you are calling upon something outside yourself fades. You begin to feel that every sound you make is the divine speaking back to you through your own voice. Prayer becomes less about communication and more about communion. He also warned of the subtle pride hidden in speech. The ego loves to be eloquent, even in devotion. It loves to feel that it is performing well, that it is being spiritual. But the heart's prayer begins only when the ego's performance ends. The divine does not listen to eloquence. It listens to authenticity. The most beautiful words can be meaningless if spoken from pride, and the simplest whisper can shake the heavens if born from sincerity. Sometimes Ibn Arabi said, "The most powerful prayer is one you cannot speak. It rises as a sigh, a tear, a stillness. It is the moment when the tongue fails and the heart takes over. When you realize that no word can describe your need, you fall into silence, and that silence becomes your offering. In that silence, the distance between you and the divine vanishes. There is no longer someone asking and someone listening. There is only the one who always was, breathing through you both." So when he said, "The tongue repeats, but the heart must speak," he was not rejecting words, he was redeeming them. He was reminding us that the purpose of prayer is not to make noise, but to awaken meaning. The tongue is the instrument, but the heart is the musician. And if the musician is asleep, the music will always be out of tune. Let your words come from the depth of feeling, not from memory. Let them arise slowly, as if each one were being born in that very moment, when the heart begins to speak. Prayer becomes alive. It stops being an act you perform and becomes a state you live in. The more you listen inwardly, the more you realize that even when your tongue is silent, the heart never stops speaking. And when the heart finally speaks fully, you will understand what Ibn Arabi meant when he said that the divine does not wait for your words, it waits for your awakening. Prayer in its highest form is not asking, not praising, not reciting. It is simply being so present that the one you seek is found in the very act of your breath. That is when the tongue becomes silent and the heart begins to speak, the only word that ever mattered, the word that has no sound, the word that is simply being. 3. The place of prayer is not the ground beneath you. Ibn Arabi said, "Do not look for the divine in the corners of a mosque or in the pattern of a carpet. Do not imagine that the sacred is confined to walls, to direction, or to ritual space." He taught that the true sanctuary is not built by hands, but by awareness. The place of prayer is not beneath your feet, it is within your being. Wherever you become truly present, that place becomes holy ground. For most of us, prayer is something we go to rather than something we enter within. We face a wall, we choose a direction, we mark a space as sacred. But Ibn Arabi asked, how can you travel toward the one who is never apart? Every direction points to him, and yet he is not bound by direction. The East and the West belong to the same light. When you stand in awareness, the entire world becomes your prayer mat. When you bow in sincerity, every grain of dust beneath you joins in your worship. He said that the divine has no address, because the divine is the address of everything. You may face one direction in prayer, but the real turning is inward. The Kaaba of stone is a symbol. The Kaaba of the heart is the reality. The outer direction reminds you of order, but the inner direction reveals intimacy. If your body faces the sacred but your heart faces the world, then you have not yet arrived. He invited seekers to discover what he called the unseen sanctuary. It is not built with stone nor measured in steps, but found in stillness. It exists in the space where thought stops and presence begins. You enter it not by walking but by awakening. You do not prepare your body to step inside. You prepare your heart to be silent. Once you find this inner sanctuary, you will realize that every place is fit for prayer, for the Beloved is everywhere that you are aware of him. He told the story of a man who traveled far to visit a holy site, believing that prayers there were more powerful. After a long journey, He met a wise teacher who told him, "You crossed mountains to find what was always beneath your breath." Ibn Arabi loved this story because it revealed the truth that the sacred is not a location, it is a state of consciousness. When your awareness deepens, you could be in a desert or a crowded street, and it would make no difference. The moment you remember the One, that place becomes the center of the world. He wrote that the true seeker must learn to see with the heart's eye. With ordinary sight, you see a stone floor, a wall, a direction. With the eye of the heart, you see a field of divine presence shimmering in all things. The tree outside your window, the sound of water, the quiet of dawn, all are forms through which the One reveals himself. When you see this, you understand that prayer is not an escape from life, but a deeper entrance into it. Ibn Arabi said that when a person begins to understand this, their entire relationship with prayer changes. They no longer think of it as a duty imposed from above, but as a response arising from within. They pray not because they must, but because they cannot help it. Every breath becomes an act of remembrance. Every moment becomes an opportunity to return. The sacred is no longer something you schedule, it becomes something you live. He warned that many people confine their sense of God to the space of worship. They meet him there and then leave him there. But the divine is not a guest waiting in the corner of a building. The divine is the host of your existence, the silent presence that holds every heartbeat. When you rise from prayer, you do not leave him behind. You carry him with you, because he never left in the first place. The place of prayer, he said, is the meeting point between the visible and the invisible. It is the moment you realize that what you call here and what you call there are the same. You bow down not to a distant Lord, but to the life that breathes through you even now. When you understand this, geography loses its power, direction dissolves. You could face any way in any place, and your prayer would still find its way home. He used to say that the whole earth is a mosque, not because it should replace sacred spaces, but because everything in existence participates in worship. The mountain stands in stillness. The ocean bows in rhythm. The stars prostrate in light. You are not the only one praying. You are joining an eternal chorus that never stopped. When you awaken to this, prayer becomes less of a performance and more of a participation. You are not calling the divine from afar. You are recognizing the divine already present in all things. Ibn Arabi often reflected on the paradox of direction. Humans need a direction to focus their minds, but the truth has no direction. He said the outer direction is a mercy. It gives shape to the formless, but one must never mistake the shape for the reality. The true turning happens when the heart turns toward its source. That turn can happen anywhere, in solitude, in sorrow, in joy, in stillness, even in chaos. The moment your heart remembers, you have already arrived. He explained that when you pray with awareness of this inner sanctuary, you stop feeling like you are moving toward something. Instead, you realize you are being drawn. The divine is not your destination. It is your movement, your longing, your breath. The place of prayer is wherever this realization dawns. Sometimes that realization comes in unexpected places. You may find it in the quiet of dawn or in the middle of noise. You may feel it in a sacred space, or while walking alone under the open sky. Wherever the heart awakens to presence, that is the ground of worship. Ibn Arabi would say that when your awareness deepens, you could be sweeping the floor, working, or walking through a marketplace, and you would still be in prayer, because the real mosque is your consciousness. So when he said, "The place of prayer is not the ground beneath you," he was not denying the beauty of sacred places. He was reminding us not to limit the infinite to them. The divine does not live in stone or silence. The divine lives in awareness, The outer place of prayer is a reflection of the inner one. The body faces the Qibla, but the soul faces the one who is beyond all directions. When you stand in prayer, remember that you are standing not in a room, but in a universe that prays with you. The ground beneath you, the air around you, the light upon your face, all are witnesses to the same presence. You are never outside the sanctuary, because the sanctuary is your own being. To truly pray, Ibn Arabi said, is to awaken to this truth, so that wherever you are already standing in the presence of the divine. There is no place you can go to be closer, and no distance you can travel to escape. The real journey is not across the earth, but into the heart. Once you reach that place, you will find that the ground itself was never ordinary. It was always holy, waiting for you to notice. 4. Stop performing. Start disappearing. Ibn Arabi said that most people perform prayer the way an actor performs a role, carefully, beautifully, but always aware of being watched. He warned that the most dangerous form of pride is the pride hidden inside devotion. It wears the garments of humility, but carries the scent of the self. When you begin to care how your prayer looks, how your voice sounds, or how long you stand, the ego has quietly stepped onto the stage. You may still be bowing, still whispering sacred words, but your heart has begun to perform for an audience that exists only in your imagination. He taught that true prayer begins when performance ends. As long as you are conscious of doing something called worship, you are still standing outside the mystery. You are still calculating, measuring, comparing. You are still the one who prays, and God is still the one you address. But when you disappear, when the boundaries of self dissolve and you no longer know who is speaking, who is listening, or who is moving, then worship transforms into something else. It ceases to be an act and becomes an unveiling. He said that prayer is not an act you perform for God's attention. It is a space in which the self falls away and only God remains. The ego wants to be seen, even in holiness. It wants to feel pious, pure, devoted. It loves to collect invisible rewards, to count its good deeds, to whisper to itself, "I am close." But Ibn Arabi taught that true closeness cannot be claimed. The one who says, "I am near to God," has already placed a distance between himself and the divine. The moment you say "I," separation returns. The real secret of worship is disappearance. The body still moves, the lips still speak, but the sense of doership fades. The prayer continues, yet you no longer feel that you are praying. It is as if you are being prayed through. The divine moves your limbs, breathes your words, bows your form. You are both the worshipper and the worshipped, both the voice and the silence, listening to it. When you reach this state, Ibn Arabi said, you have entered the essence of prayer, where all duality dies. To understand this, imagine the difference between a candle that tries to shine and a candle that simply burns. The first is aware of its light, proud of its glow. The second has forgotten itself entirely, and in forgetting it becomes pure illumination. The true worshipper is like the second candle. The light that appears is not yours. You have vanished, and only the flame remains. He reminded his students that worship is not a transaction. You do not stand before the infinite to earn favor or escape punishment. You stand there because your soul cannot help but bow before what it truly is. Every moment of true prayer is a return to your original nature, a state where there is no self to impress, no reward to gain, and no fear to escape. Only presence, only surrender. He said that God hides behind the veil of your own image. The harder you try to perform well, the thicker the veil becomes. You start to worship your performance instead of the presence. You focus on posture instead of perception, on precision instead of participation. You pray as though the divine were a judge grading your form, rather than the very life flowing through you. Ibn Arabi urged seekers to stop worrying about correctness and start longing for connection. The outer form of prayer is beautiful, but its purpose is to make you disappear into meaning. Disappearing does not mean losing awareness. It means losing self-consciousness. It is not sleep, it is awakening. When you no longer stand apart from the act of prayer, you begin to see that everything has always been praying. The trees sway, the rivers flow, the stars move in silent remembrance. The universe itself is in perpetual prostration. To disappear is to join that endless worship, to forget yourself so completely that what remains is only the rhythm of existence, bowing to its source. He said that every act of worship carries two possibilities. It can either strengthen the ego or dissolve it. When you think, "I am worshipping well," the ego grows stronger, cloaked in piety. But when you think, "I am nothing," when you vanish into the act itself, then worship becomes pure. It becomes the mirror in which the divine sees its own reflection. That is the moment of real beauty, the moment when prayer no longer belongs to you. Ibn Arabi once said, "The perfect worshipper is the one who has forgotten that he is worshipping, not because he is careless, but because he is consumed." The one who disappears in prayer has no memory of himself, no audience, no intention except being. He does not ask for anything, not even paradise. For him, the act of standing before the divine is already the reward. To reach this state, he advised seekers to watch their thoughts during prayer. The ego is subtle. It may whisper, "I am praying sincerely," or "I feel so close today." Even these thoughts, he said, must be surrendered. True sincerity is not knowing you are sincere. It is the absence of self-evaluation, the vanishing of inner commentary. When the mind stops naming the experience, the heart opens to it. In that silence, prayer deepens beyond measure. Sometimes this disappearance comes in moments of stillness, sometimes in moments of brokenness. When life crushes your pride, when you have nothing left to offer but your breath, the ego falls quiet. The prayer that rises from that place is raw and wordless, but it is real. Ibn Arabi said that such a prayer born from surrender rather than control is more beloved than 1,000 perfect recitations. He warned that as long as you think of prayer as something you do, you will remain its owner. But when you realize that even your desire to pray was placed in you by the divine, you will begin to disappear. The longing itself is the divine knocking from within. The worshipper is only the echo of that knock. To disappear is to recognize that you are not calling upon God, you are being called by God through the very sound of your voice. In that realization, humility becomes effortless. You no longer compete to be holy, because there is no one left to be holy. You no longer fear failure, because there is no one left to fail. You are not the speaker or the listener, you are the silence between them. So when Ibn Arabi said, "Stop performing, start disappearing," he was not telling you to abandon form, he was telling you to let go of self-importance. Keep the outer form, but empty it of pride. Bow, but vanish while bowing. Speak, but let your words come from a place deeper than thought. Let prayer happen through you, not by you. And if one day during prayer you suddenly lose yourself, if you forget the words, forget the room, forget even that you exist, then rejoice. That is not a mistake. That is the truth revealing itself. The performance has ended. The actor has left the stage. What remains is pure presence. What remains is worship without a worshipper, love without an object, a silence so full that it overflows into everything. In that silence, the prayer never ends. 5. The prayer beyond words. Ibn Arabi said there exists a prayer that no lips can utter, no language can hold, and no ritual can contain. It is a prayer that does not depend on form, place, or time. A prayer that continues even when you are silent, even when you are unaware of praying. He called it the prayer beyond words, the prayer of the heart that beats in rhythm with the universe itself. Most people, he observed, believe prayer begins when they speak and ends when they stop. But that is the prayer of the tongue, not of the being. The prayer of the tongue is sound. The prayer of the being is existence itself. Everything in creation is engaged in this silent act of worship. The stars that burn, the rivers that flow, the trees that sway, even the stones that rest. Each one is proclaiming, through its very being, its dependence upon the one who sustains it. The prayer beyond words is not performed, it is lived. He said that when you reach this level of awareness, every breath becomes a remembrance. You begin to feel that life itself is praying through you. The inhale and exhale are not just movements of air, they are the ebb and flow of divine remembrance. To breathe is to say, I am sustained. To exhale is to say, I return. In this rhythm, speech becomes unnecessary. The whole body becomes the language, and existence becomes the message. Ibn Arabi explained that this silent prayer arises when the heart is so full of presence that speech feels like interruption. You do not need to declare your devotion, because your being has already become the declaration. In that state, you do not think of God, you are thought by God. You do not call upon the divine, you are called into awareness by the divine itself. The line between the worshipper and the worship dissolves, and what remains is only presence without pronouns, love without dialogue. He said the prayer beyond words begins where the intellect ends. The mind is bound to language, but the heart knows truths that no sentence can carry. The deepest realizations come not in the form of thoughts, but in the form of stillness. The lover does not always speak to the beloved. Sometimes they simply gaze. In that gaze, communication is complete. So too, when the soul gazes inwardly upon the source, no word can improve the meeting. Silence itself becomes the highest speech. This kind of prayer, Ibn Arabi said, can awaken at any moment. It might happen in the middle of your formal worship, or when you are walking in the quiet of the night. It might happen while you are weeping in loss or rejoicing in gratitude. Suddenly, you realize that you are not speaking to the divine. You are surrounded by the divine, immersed in it, inseparable from it. That realization steals your words away because you have nothing left to say. He taught that ordinary prayer has a direction. It begins with you and moves toward the divine. The prayer beyond words has no direction because there is no separation. It is not you reaching upward, it is the divine rising within you. The soundless prayer does not begin when you speak or end when you stop. It is the continuous hum of creation returning to its source. He would tell his students that love is the true language of this prayer. Words can describe longing, but only love can embody it. When love fills the heart completely, words fall away like scaffolding after the building stands on its own. The lover no longer repeats the beloved's name, because the name has become indistinguishable from the self. The prayer beyond words is what happens when you no longer need to say the name, because you have become the echo of it. Ibn Arabi often described how this kind of prayer transforms perception. The seeker no longer sees the world as separate from the divine, but as a reflection of. Every sound, every sight, every motion becomes part of the same liturgy. The rain is not merely falling, it is reciting. The wind is not merely moving, it is remembering. The beating of your own heart becomes the drum of the cosmos, keeping time with the eternal remembrance of all things. He said that once this prayer awakens in you, You will begin to feel it even when your mind is occupied with ordinary tasks. You might be speaking to someone, working, or walking, and yet deep within there is a pulse of awareness that never fades. It is not loud, it is subtle, like a quiet hum beneath the noise of life. That hum is the sound of your soul, remembering its origin. That is the prayer beyond words, the one that does not depend on will but flows naturally, like a river returning to the sea. He warned, though, that the ego will try to claim even this experience. It will whisper, "I have reached a higher state. I pray without words." But the moment you think this, you have fallen back into duality. The prayer beyond words cannot be owned or achieved. It can only be received. It is a grace, not a goal. It happens when you stop striving, when you stop seeking to feel spiritual, and simply rest in awareness of what is already present. The prayer beyond words does not require perfection. It often begins in imperfection, in your weakness, your pain, your silence, when you have no more strength to speak. When life strips you bare, when all your practiced prayers fail to comfort you, when all your memorized words dissolve into tears, that is when the deeper prayer begins. Because in that moment, you are no longer trying to say the right thing. You are simply being, and being, Ibn Arabi said, is the highest form of remembrance. He also spoke of the danger of confusing speech with sincerity. Many can speak beautifully of devotion, but remain untouched by it. The prayer beyond words demands nothing from you except authenticity. You do not have to sound holy. You do not even have to feel holy. You only have to be honest. The silence that comes from an honest heart is more sacred than 1,000 perfect recitations. In this state, the heart becomes a sanctuary without walls, a temple that never closes. You do not enter and leave prayer anymore, because there is nowhere else to go. Every moment, every breath is a continuation of the same conversation. You do not look for signs or answers, because you have realized that the prayer itself is the answer, the living connection between your soul and its source. So when Ibn Arabi spoke of the prayer beyond words, he was calling the seeker to a deeper intimacy, one that transcends form. He was not rejecting the outer prayer, he was revealing its hidden purpose. The rituals, the words, the directions, they are all doors, but the door is not the destination. The moment you step through it, you leave it behind. The goal of the spoken prayer is to awaken the unspoken one, the ceaseless remembrance that breathes beneath everything. And when you finally taste that silence, when you realize that the divine was never absent, when you feel that even your heartbeat is a form of worship, you will understand why Ibn Arabi said that the purest prayer has no sound, because what the tongue tries to express, the heart already knows. And what the heart knows, the soul is already living. The prayer beyond words is the soul's native speech, the language it spoke before the tongue was born, and the language it will speak long after the tongue is gone. It is the conversation that has no beginning and no end. It is the silence in which the infinite listens to itself. 6. The shadow of the ego in worship. Ibn Arabi said that among all veils that separate a person from the divine, the most subtle and dangerous is the veil of the ego hiding inside devotion. It wears the mask of piety and humility, but beneath it lies the same old desire to be someone, to achieve, to be seen, to be approved. He warned that the ego can survive even inside prayer, even inside love for God, whispering quietly, "Look how sincere I am." This is the shadow that darkens the light of worship, when the self becomes proud of its own humility. He taught that the ego is a master of disguise. When it cannot control through worldly desire, it hides behind spiritual pride. It begins to count its prayers, its tears, its moments of stillness. It takes credit for longing, forgetting that even longing itself is a gift from the one who planted it. The ego loves to be the center, even in surrender. It wants to be the one who is close to God, the one who feels chosen, the one who has attained. But Ibn Arabi reminded seekers that the very act of saying, "I have attained," is the proof that you have not. The moment the self declares ownership of the experience disappears. He said the purest worship is the one that leaves no trace of the worshipper. The act happens, the surrender happens, but there is no pride in it, no thought of "I prayed well" or "I felt spiritual." To be proud of devotion is to turn your face from the beloved and look into a mirror instead. You begin to admire your reflection instead of the light that made it visible. The ego, he said, does not always seek pleasure or power. Sometimes it seeks holiness. But whether it seeks gold or glory or God, it is still the same I seeking to exist. He told his students that the true purpose of prayer, fasting, and remembrance is to weaken the hold of the ego, not to feed it with new reasons to feel superior. When you perform an act of worship and immediately feel that you are better, you have turned a sacred moment into a cage. You have worshipped your image of goodness rather than the reality of the divine. The ego thrives on comparison. It survives by measuring. It says, "I am more sincere than him," or "I am further along than her." But in truth, there are no ranks in the presence of the infinite. There is only the one, appearing through countless forms of surrender. Ibn Arabi taught that humility does not mean denying your goodness. It means recognizing its source. The humble person does not say, "I am nothing," in false modesty. The humble person says, "Everything I am flows from the One." There is no shame in goodness when it is seen as a reflection of divine grace. The problem arises only when you imagine that the reflection belongs to you. The sun never praises itself for shining. It simply shines. He often said that the ego is not destroyed by fighting it directly, because even the fight gives it energy. The more you wrestle with it, the more it hides behind the thought, "I am trying to be pure." Instead, he advised, expose it to light, observe it without judgment, watch how it reacts in prayer, how it seeks to be seen, how it loves recognition. Do not condemn it, understand it. Awareness is the beginning of transformation. When you see how subtle the ego's movements are, you begin to loosen its grip. He used to say that the true seeker is the one who can pray for years and never once think about being a person who prays. They do not identify with their acts of worship. They see themselves as an instrument through which worship happens. When you reach this state, you no longer perform devotion. You allow devotion to perform itself through you. The ego disappears, and only the act remains, pure and luminous. He described the ego as a shadow that follows you even when you face the sun. It is not evil by nature. It is simply the natural byproduct of individuality. But the problem arises when you mistake the shadow for the self. You begin to live for it, to feed it, protect it, polish it, even in spiritual life. Ibn Arabi said that enlightenment does not mean destroying the shadow. It means realizing that it was never separate from the light. The ego dissolves not through hatred, but through recognition. He told his students, when you begin to feel proud of your devotion, pause, ask yourself, who is proud? When you feel spiritually superior, ask, who feels superior? Each time you trace the thought back to its source, you will find only illusion. The I that wants to own holiness cannot survive that question. The more you ask, the quieter it becomes. Eventually, silence answers for you. That silence is humility, the natural state of a heart that has seen through itself. He said that God does not look at the outer shape of worship. He looks at the space from which it arises. If that space is filled with the self, the act remains on the surface. But if that space is empty, empty of pride, of comparison, of ownership, then even a single breath of remembrance can illuminate 1,000 worlds. The smallest act done without ego outweighs the grandest display done with it. Ibn Arabi also warned of the ego's need to feel unworthy. It is clever. It can use guilt and shame as easily as pride. Some people, he said, speak constantly of their unworthiness, but this too is a hidden form of self-absorption. They focus not on the divine, but on their own failure. They wear humility like a costume, but the actor beneath is still the same. Real humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is forgetting yourself altogether. He taught that love is the fire that burns the shadow of ego. The lover does not think, "I am loving." The lover is consumed. The ego cannot survive in the presence of love, because love leaves no room for separation. When you love the divine so deeply that you forget to evaluate your love, the shadow disappears naturally. You do not have to destroy it, you simply outgrow it. He said the ego is like dust floating in the air. It cannot be removed by effort. It settles only when the air becomes still. In the same way, when the mind becomes quiet, the ego's movement stops. In that stillness you see clearly that there was never a separate you to defend or purify. There was only the one living through you, experiencing itself through your form. When you reach that understanding, worship becomes effortless. You no longer pray to impress, to achieve, or to earn. You pray because it is your nature to return. You bow because your heart cannot remain upright before such beauty. You love because love is what you are. The shadow disappears because it was never real to begin with. So when Ibn Arabi spoke of the shadow of the ego in worship, he was not condemning those who struggle with pride. He was showing that the struggle itself is part of the journey. The ego's presence is not failure. It is a teacher. It shows you where you still believe in separation, where you still think of yourself as other than the divine. The task is not to hate the ego, but to see through it. And once you do, prayer changes completely. You no longer say, "I am worshiping God." You realize there is no I and there is no other. There is only worship happening, life breathing, love remembering itself. The shadow vanishes, and all that remains is light bowing to light. Ibn Arabi said that the purpose of prayer is not to reach God, but to awaken to the truth that you were never apart. All the movements, all the words, all the silences are simply ways of remembering what has always been. When you stand, when you bow, when you place your forehead upon the ground, you are not traveling toward a destination. You are returning to your own center, to the heart, where the divine already resides. He taught that the true seeker begins by praying out of duty, then prays out of longing, and finally realizes that prayer itself is the breath of existence. At first you speak because you wish to be heard, then you speak because you cannot bear to be silent. But one day, silence itself becomes prayer, and you realize that the divine has been both the listener and the voice all along. The outer forms of worship are precious. They are the language through which the soul first learns to speak. But Ibn Arabi reminds us not to stop at the language. Go beyond the sound of the words into the meaning they carry, beyond the movement of the body into the stillness of the heart, beyond the repetition of remembrance into the awareness that remembrance is the fabric of being. He said that every act of prayer is an invitation to move from habit to awakening, from form to essence, from separation to unity. The bow of the body calls the heart to surrender. The whisper of the tongue calls the soul to speak. The direction of the face calls the spirit to turn inward. And when all of these movements align, prayer ceases to be something you perform. It becomes something you are. Ibn Arabi's message was not to abandon prayer, but to inhabit it, to let it draw you from the surface of words into the ocean of presence, to realize that when you pray, you are not calling upon a distant God, you are allowing the divine to remember itself through you. You are a mirror polished by surrender, reflecting the infinite back to itself. He said that the greatest mistake is to think that prayer begins when you raise your hands and ends when you lower them. Prayer has no beginning and no end, because existence itself is an act of devotion. Every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of awareness is the soul bowing before its source. So when Ibn Arabi said, "Stop praying like this," he was not condemning the outer form. He was inviting you to step through it, to stop performing prayer and start becoming it, to stop speaking to the divine as if it were elsewhere, and to awaken to the truth that it is here, closer than your breath, deeper than your thoughts, and more intimate than your very being. The prayer he called us toward is the prayer of presence, of silence, of love. It is the prayer that does not need to begin, because it never ends. The prayer that asks for nothing because it has already found everything. The prayer in which the worshipper, the act of worship, and the one being worshipped are revealed to be the same. And when that truth dawns within you, when you realize that you have been prayed all along, you will understand what Ibn Arabi meant when he said, "The true prayer is not when you speak to God, but when God speaks through you. That is where the journey ends and where it truly begins."